I never quite know what the what's the depth of knowledge about what I do or our office does in our crowd. So if I cover stuff that's some real basic to you, forgive me, but I'll try to get to a broad enough level that it'll be information that'll be worthwhile for you. I'm the county assessor, which what that basically means is that I'm in charge of being the county appraiser, and we appraise. That means that we list, we discover, list, and value all the real property in the county, which is the land and buildings. But we also value the business personal property, and we value which is what's called the tangible property, and we do that. We revalue that every year. And we value the real estate property every 2 years, every odd number 2 years. So it's 2011. So you get notices at this point. We also value a lot of other types of properties, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. The assessment process or valuation process is the basis for generating property tax revenues that pay for our schools, our roads, fire protection, public police protection, and other local services. All of the revenue generated by property taxes stays within the county. None of it goes to the state. So property taxes do not support any state services. Our goal in our office is the equalization of all property taxes, so that the valuations are correct proportionally to each other, so that everybody pays their fair share of taxes according to what the state statutes say. And with every 2 years having to do 116,000 properties, it's quite a challenge. I have a staff of 47.5 people, and 22 of those are appraisers. So it's something that having to do every 2 years is quite a task. From when I started in this business 30-some years ago, we did tax roll by hand with pencils, and everything was done on cost manuals that were created by the state, and you just filled out cards, and the appraisers spent most of their time just driving around reviewing stuff and taking pictures and everything. They weren't really doing what is considered appraisal today. And over the last 30 years, everything changed. We went to reappraisal cycles. When I started, I think we were at 1948 and 1965 level. I'm kind of dating myself here, but this was actually back in the 70s. And then we jumped up in the 80s to closer to current, and we went to 4-year cycles, and now we are on 2-year cycles, and that's fine with me. I know there are some states that go on annual cycles, but it's nice to have the break in between to be able to do other projects and improve the work that the other things you're doing, and make sure that you're getting ready for the next cycle and that type of thing. So other categories that we do, we value producing mines. We value we get values coming from the state for state assessed, which is your public utilities, your railroads, or anything like that's in your county. They give us an attribution of that value that's reported through the Department of Property Taxation in the state, and then that value goes on our rolls. We do, of course, commercial industrial property, residential. We're primarily a residential county. That's where most of our tax base is. We do agricultural, which is all the properties. It's been in the paper a lot lately because there's been some recent bills that were passed and made some changes. Not very major changes, because this is a agricultural state, and a lot of the state legislation are people who have ranches. So it's something that it's very hard to make any incremental changes to those laws, because they don't want those exemptions threatened. And so that's just the nature of the politics of Colorado. Let's see what else. We get oil and gas revenue. We don't get a lot. About $21 million, somewhere in that range, where you go to Weld County, it's half their tax base. And what that does is then it jumps up and down very quickly, depending on what's happening with barrels of oil and gas. So their revenues are feast and famine in a lot of ways, depending on the volatility of that market. And vacant land. We value vacant land also. So those are all the categories that we're in charge of, aside from the personal property, as I mentioned. Our database that we maintain is the taxpayers database. So we provide a lot of services with that. We have a website that we're getting more and more GIS centric about providing information, and we provide that data in a lot of ways. We sell data that ends up, basically our data gets sold to somebody who ends up putting it on Zillow. It gets pretty stale, and I can't ever really quite guarantee who the quality of what goes on those types of websites, but different AVM sites and everything, but all that data originally comes through our office, and it gets dispersed. That's where it comes from. So let's see, what else have I got here? I think Danielle, you're on.
We were going to talk about appeals because we kind of figured that's really what people want to know about, especially in this season of time. Before I worked for the county, I was a fee appraiser, and my boss one time told me, after I'd been berated by somebody for not appraising something as high as they wanted it to be, he said, telling somebody their house isn't worth that much is kind of like telling their child's ugly. In assessment, it's sort of the reverse. I tell you your house is worth $1 million, you think it's worth $800,000, and all of a sudden it's, hey, you're ripping my retirement fund out of my pocketbook, and people get really, really fired up. But fundamentally, it's very, very different than fee appraisal in that we have different guidelines that we have to follow. Initially, we appraise in mass, and then we go to a little bit more of slightly more of a fee structure. But initially, one of the differences between us and Zillow, so a lot of them are based on algorithms and statistics, but we have to do fundamentally sales confirmation, which is a big piece, and that's what we spend a lot of our time doing when we're not doing appeals. But appeals actually accounts for a large portion of our calendar. And I know you guys probably can't see this very well, but so this is sort of the slide we have. We basically start the 2011 reappraisal a year and a half beforehand. So the way appeals work is that we go through the reappraisal process, we do all of our sales confirmations, we spend months doing the statistics and building up the models, pulling all of it out onto a notice evaluation that people get, and then May 1st is our open house party. The notices go out into the mail, and for the whole month of May, we see lots of people who love us to varying degrees. And in all fairness, 99% of the people are either frustrated or pretty reasonable to work with. I mean, I'm sure it's probably the same 1% that is the same 1% that berates everybody. So, some of them just get really, really fired up, and there's no talking them down off of that shelf, and then we send them to Jerry. So the heart of the matter for what you guys are going to want to know is May is the month. It's a reappraisal every 2 years, but the right to appeal is every single year. So if there's something that somebody discovers in between, that right comes up again. But May, the biggest thing is that May is the time when people's maximum rights to appeal their value exist in May. So they can still do a value inquiry afterwards and go through and review it, but the legal rights to go back and dispute it all start in May. So everybody has to appeal by June 1st. Then we spend June, July, and August reviewing them and answering them. By the end of August, people get what's called a notice of determination that says, here's what we reviewed and here's what we have determined. And then I tell them, when you get your notice, take a look at it and decide whether or not it's reasonable. Now, reasonable does not mean, well, I think it's worth $2,000 less. In most cases, that's so finite, we're not even dealing with something that finite. But if somebody looks and says there's no way, then the instructions for them to appeal further are included with that. So the next thing is called a County Board of Equalization hearing, which I tell people, it's 3 people in a conference table. This is not, people think, okay, it's the County Board of Equalization, it's the county commissioners, I'm going to go and stand up at a podium. No. We're not to that point yet. So it's very informal, but the county commissioners typically hire somebody, usually real estate appraisers, or somebody with a real estate background, sometimes attorneys, but mainly real estate appraisers, that hear these hearings on their behalf. So then they make a recommendation to the commissioners, which the commissioners usually take unless there's something that's additionally disputed. They bring their decision, and then if somebody still disagrees, the next level is called Board of Assessment Appeals, and that gets into the next calendar year. But the point is, the one of the points of the calendar is to try to get all this resolved before it becomes a tax bill. Because then it becomes a lot more complicated matter. And so we don't take personal offense when somebody comes in and appeals. If they feel that something's wrong, please come in, let us know. We have 116,000 properties that we're trying to manage with hundreds of pieces of data for each of them. And so we really that's sort of our opportunity to put our data out there and have people come back and say, hey, and help us. Because sometimes, no matter how accurate you are, you double tap, you tap a photo. Somebody came up to me earlier and said their photo's wrong. No matter how perfect we try to be, it's not possible to be 100% perfect 100% of the time. And so we don't really see it as people coming in and with their torches and pitchforks in hand. It's really their opportunity to help us get it right.
But now, what should you come in and what makes sense to say this needs to be revalued and here's why?
If somebody takes a look at it and says, you know what, the house across the street was listed for this much and didn't sell, my friends have been trying to do this, if they have some real estate information, that's really, really helpful. If they have deferred maintenance on the house, especially if it's extensive, if they can get it cost secure, that's something that we can consider. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, all somebody has to do is sign the form and submit it on time. That's right there. They have appealed, which means we're going to take it, we're going to take a look at it. So initially it's done off the statistics. Then when somebody appeals, and a licensed appraiser is going to take a look at it, they're going to decide what they think were the most competitive sales that occurred during the sales period. And those are all states that we don't get to pick and choose the dates that it's everywhere. So I had somebody say, well, I'm going to go to Weld County because they do it differently. And I said, I hope not. It's state law. That would be really, really bad.
So what's the best way to formulate the appeal? Like, should we include a list of comps with the photos and a description of why?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the biggest thing is the dates. So I had somebody who sent an appeal, and the appraisal is from 2 months ago. Well, the dates that we're using right now are from sales from June 30th of 2010 up to 5 years beforehand. So they can submit it now, and I legally can't consider it. I can consider the description of the property, but I can't consider any of the sales that appraiser may have used. Because that appraiser is using the guidelines by the lending institution, which have very different dates than what we're allowed to use. That's also why, especially in an upturning market, somebody's appraising something up here and we're down here. Well, we're basically sort of historical appraisals. It's a set date and we're locked into that date. So we love it when somebody submits comps and says, here are ones that would have competed with my house. They're the great right time frames and everything. I love getting those and going, oh, you're absolutely correct. This is great. We're all in agreement. Woohoo. What isn't as helpful is if somebody has the largest house in a cookie cutter subdivision and they pulled up the 3 foreclosures of the smallest houses on the worst lots and say, here's what my house is worth. Because you look at it and go, well, that's nice. But
do you penalize them and bump them up?
No.
Can you do that?
No. But you do look at it and go, yeah, and your house is 1,500 square feet larger on the golf course. I don't think so. And that's about as far as the consideration gets on that comp. But we have people that say, this is what's going on with my house. My house is sliding down the hillside, and they submit an $80,000 bill from the structural engineer. Well, we'll consider that, absolutely. So it needs to pertain to either the sales or it needs to pertain to the subject property. But if they want to submit the Newsweek article about what's going on in Washington, D.C., legally I can't do anything with that.
All right, so I'm going to ask the employee question, and that's
Sure.
the Macon Cole's question. How did his
I'll let
house,
you
it was 800,000 appraised. He listed it for $2.9 billion and sold it for
Okay, so
1.5.
I love the opportunity
How'd that
to talk
happen?
about. I'm not going to talk about Macon or his motivations or anything. And as far as just for the record, as far as we know, that there was nothing that was done to the house without permits or anything. There's no evidence of that. So what really went on there is, I don't know if any of you have driven into Wilson Court. It's a little cul-de-sac, and it sits up on kind of like a bit of a ridge, so that there's about 3 or 4 houses at the end of the cul-de-sac that have really nice views, overlooking the Flatirons and everything. Right below it, one street below, there's houses that don't have those views. It's just sort of topological anomaly there. And there's actually houses that if you enter the cul-de-sac that don't have those views. So when you drive in that cul-de-sac and you drive around, you can see a few of the houses. It's very typical Boulder kind of a view there. There's houses that are bigger and there's houses that are smaller, but the ones as you enter the cul-de-sac probably sell for about $800,000. The ones right along there with those views, they've been scraped, they've been rebuilt because of where they sit, and they're $1.5 million, $2 million, in those kind of ranges. Actually, Macon ended up selling for $1,570,000. Interesting thing, I know nobody believes this, but once we corrected the characteristics on his home, when we did the model this time, I went to the appraiser, I said, guess what the model came in on the value on Macon's house? And he said, I don't know, about $1.3 million or something. It was $1,500,775. I think we were like $75,000 over what the sale price was that it came in. So we knew all along it was never going to sell for $2.1 million. And yeah, we were at $900,000 originally, but the appraiser never went out there when he appealed it, and he pulled comps, but they weren't comps of those 3 or 4 houses up there. He had comps that he'd pulled because he didn't have the topological characteristics on there, and he also didn't know the interior finish. So I'll talk about the interior finish. The last time an appraiser was in there was 15 years ago. 15 years may not seem a lot, but in appraisal time, that was Terry Phillips was assessor. If anybody remembers when Terry was assessor, we were on a mainframe computer, and at the time, the market range of homes was not that great throughout the entire county. So we could get by with 3 qualities of homes. We had low, we had average, and we had good, and that could cover anything almost up to $1 million down to the low quality kinds of homes, and the models were coming out fine. Plus we weren't doing everything every 2 years in those days and everything. But 15 years ago that was adequate. Then things started changing. We started getting prairie mansions and things like that. And all of a sudden the models weren't keeping up with the sales. So we started creating new categories like very good. Then we went to excellent. We created an excellent. Then we created exceptional 1, exceptional 2, and we have exceptional 3. Because we've got to have qualities and things that describe a $5+ million urban condo sitting right here right here, right around us. We down to or those monster mansions out on the plains and everything. So we had to create all this thing. The problem is with 116,000 properties, if somebody doesn't take out a permit that is the kind that you'd enter the house, you can't go back and question the appraiser, who's the one who originally was in there 15 years ago, is long gone. They put that house as a good. Mm-hmm. So it sat there as a good. And now, when all of a sudden we saw the MLS just like all the rest of you saw, and whoever took it to the newspapers, and we saw all those pictures, and we went, oh, well, that's an excellent, or it's a very good, or something in that range. Once we've set the quality as what we establish now, when we put on the topo, the view elements that were missing, those were truly missing, and got all this corrected. The model predicted the home within less than $100,000 of what it sold for. Nobody believes that. I mean, I know when they published the last article, I read the bloggers, and the bloggers, they're really so kind. But that's really what happened with the property.
Sure, yeah. It's really interesting because the first house I built was on Wilson Court.
Oh, yeah?
We first started in business in the 1960s, as how old I am. And we built the one across the street from Macon's. I didn't build Macon's house. All those houses on the other side are replacement houses. I built one right next door to Macon's, and I actually visited that house in the last week because one of our community members happens to live in it, and I was just amazed. We built those houses were $30,000 to $40,000 houses, of course, in the '60s. And the one right across the street, I think you were right on. you're exactly right. You know, they were, just across here was a $30,000 house with a $50,000. There were twice as much, and the view then even wasn't. Now the view is so valuable. People pay a ton of money. It's just like the location. I mean, it's like what I was talking about here. You know, you just get a little closer, and the location makes a lot of difference. But that was a weird one, that Wilson.
Yeah,
Court.
and so, you know, once we discovered it, well, all I could say is that it's unfortunate we missed it, but you explain that to a reporter, but reporters, they have an angle, and they, you know,
Yeah, but
so
what
there
about
was.
the fact that he's not pulling permits for his improvements as well? I mean, he's setting himself up.
Actually,
for-
there's no evidence that he didn't pay.
Yeah,
There was some interior finish there. I mean, there was granite countertops that he might have put in, but most people don't pull permits for granite
Yeah, but
or
if
something.
he's like putting in a new bathroom,
Well,
or I mean, I've
yeah.
done plenty
He
of that.
he
So-
appealed, and that's the part.
That's-
as a
that's
public,
the
as
part
a public
that-
figure, he
that was-
appealed knowing he knew
Right.
what's in his house, and he
Yeah.
appealed, and that's the part that
Oh,
got
so he
And
knew
rubbed
what he
out.
pulled a permit on and what he didn't.
Well,
pull.
he
He
knew
knew
what
what
he's
his
living
house
in.
was valued at and what the tax assessor had assessed it at, and he still appealed it, even though it was way below what he knew it was worth.
So, and I'm not going to go into. I'm not going to
Make
defend
or
Macon,
may
or
not
I'm
be
not going to
crossed.
condemn them.
Right.
But I can tell you from our perspective what went wrong with us, because all the appraiser did is pull the comps within a block.
Right.
But you know, they could have been in the same cul-de-sac, and they would have indicated 800,000. He made the adjustments, just unaware of all those things until we saw a MLS, and then it was all very clear. You know, so that's
You know, so much of the. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, does it make sense for people to present you with comps if you guys probably have more access to it than the general public? I mean, you know, it's.
Well, we provide, it's, again, it's the taxpayers database. So we provide, when people appeal, we have all the sales that we use that are good, what we consider good qualified sales, on the website, and we give our time trends. We give all that information so people can build a case, because a lot of people have a lot of misperceptions. And Daniel went into this a little bit about our office, how people, they come in and they want a defense, you know, so yeah, and it's always helpful, you know, if they can pick sales that they know right around them and say that house was the same model and everything and it just sold. We might not know that, so that's helpful, but you don't have to. But the appraiser will go through and use maps and everything and pick sales around and do adjustments during the appeal period. We have 3 months to do it, so they get into some pretty good detail on it to do the work. I always like to say that when a lot of people have a conception that we will try to keep our values as high as possible to keep the tax base up and everything like that. And my response to that is, nobody that I know, and I don't think anybody that you know, gets up in the morning and says, how can I make my life more miserable? Because not only do you get tons more appeals if you are too high, but we also get audited annually, and under pretty strict statistical measures. They look at how our performance is. So if we were too low or we were too high, we flunked the audit, we have to reappraisal that same year. It's political suicide, for one thing, because I never would get it reelected. Plus, what we wanted it to be as accurate as possible and as fair as possible, because it brings in so many fewer people and makes our lives a lot easier. So that's really that's the nature of how we look at things, and we have a culture. I'm proud to say that we have a culture in our office that we're public servants. We're not bureaucrats. We create that culture, and we've done that for many years. I'm very proud of that. That we try to, when people come in, we really try to be helpful. Now, and to the best of our ability. Now, are there disagreements and are difficult times happen? Absolutely. There are times where we just have to agree to disagree, or people have negative opinions of us and what we do. I talked to a few today, amazing ones. But for the most part, what I really value is when I get a letter, like I got a letter 2 days ago on an appraiser where the person actually took the time to write in and said what a pleasant time they had meeting with our appraiser. And if somebody has that good of an experience without even knowing whether they're going to get adjustment or not, but just by the nature of meeting with them, and takes the time to write a letter, that's what I feel like I'm doing my job right in terms of my staff. And my staff, I'm very proud of them when I see that sort of thing. Anyway, that. I kind of got off on a tangent there, but I want you to know how we look at it now. Let's see.
Oh, we're out of time.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions,
Yeah.
and then we should probably wrap.
Oh,
So,
When you look at your appraiser, and you got the building and the land, and when you get the comps, just here's 3 homes in your area, you can do a fairly decent job just on square footage, amount of bathrooms, amount of bedrooms, and amount of rooms, and there's a intuitive kind of comparison that okay, I can see where they come with that. But I've always had a problem in being frustrated with the website in that how do you compare the land? Because you get, this is the Mountain View 6, Lot 7, and you don't get a sense for square footage or, Table Mesa on that side of Broadway is less than Table Mesa on this side of Broadway, or North Boulder is. So that seems to me, from one who trying to figure out, okay, are they legitimate or not, the land seems to be more nebulous.
Really, what happened when the Tabor law passed, it required that we value property on the market approach, residential property, not commercial. So that's a different situation. But residential property can only be valued on the market approach, not on a cost approach or anything else. That means land and building are together in one total value.
Period.
So and what you're really talking about here is location. What's the influence of location? So I'm just going to talk real quickly about how our algorithms work.
Okay.
Mass appraisal is done with what's called multiple regression analysis. We throw in 3, 4, 5,000 sales at a time. What was our last sales for 2 year? 8,000. 8,000 over 5 years. Time trended. We create time trends, but over the 2 year period, there's thousands of sales. What that gives the model the ability to do is actually go out there and make comparisons for things like traffic. It can isolate traffic influences. It can isolate power line influences. It can isolate lots of different things if we get that data into the database. We in the past 5 to 10 years, we've added open space, got all the open space attributes in there, golf course attributes, lots of different things. We're getting very creative about how we put in all these locational variables, and by being able to compare all the sales, the multiple regression, the mathematics of the computer can figure out what the influence is by a factor. If you do a fee appraisal with 3 or 4 or 5 sales, it's very difficult to isolate some of those factors, like say a power line. You'd have to really search to figure out how that influences something. But we actually have those things figured in. The problem with mass appraisal is that you get a very typical neighborhood, and then you have one house in there that's maybe a half lot off the alley, or it's smaller than all the ones in that area. Sometimes it doesn't do very well with that kind of thing. It'll predict all the ones that are very normal, but the unusual house may get overvalued or vice versa. So the more heterogeneous in our areas that you were talking about, Jim, where you have without scrapers, people are coming in scraping and building mansions, and then you have the house that's sitting there where in the midst of it that has nothing been done to it. There's a chance that we could have over-described the valuation on that type of property. But really, you don't have to worry about separation of land and building. It's a total value. What we do is we try to estimate a land portion later on, because we get calls from title companies or insurance companies. They want to know what the split is, and they've historically been able to get it. And we tried saying we don't furnish that anymore, but they would still call. Our front desk would get swarmed with it. So what we do is we do our best to run a separate model, put a land value out there, and say don't use this as a basis to appeal, because it's really there just to give them an idea of how to do their job. Okay.
I tell people that it's like trying to cram 116,000 properties into one box, and the fact is that appeals exist because not every property is going to go into that box. But by law, we have to try. So some of these properties, the more unique they are, the harder they are to do as a fee appraisal, the harder they are to comp out. When you're trying to set a listing price on it, the harder it's going to be to try to cram into a statistical model. And one of the things that has changed dramatically over the last couple of years and is continuing to is the amount of data sharing that goes on between us and other entities. So like traffic counts are now being converted over from cities, county, and the state. And so instead of it being an appraiser's opinion on what the traffic volume is on Broadway, it's here's what the traffic counts are. And then you group them together in groups. Then when you pour them into the statistical model, it says this is the adjustment for these different volumes. So we're trying to do more and more and more of that, so that way you're a lot more equitable, obviously, when you're sitting there going, no, actually the traffic count on that street is 6,000 cars a day, and the traffic count on that street is 10,000, and that's why they're different. That makes it a lot easier. Septics came into play as a big issue in unincorporated, and we're able now to find out who has permits for septics. So we're able to do that data sharing back and forth and be able to go back to the accounts and make sure that we get them all cleaned up and based on it. So what Jerry was talking about earlier with, you were on a mainframe and you had this number of options. But every time we go through conversion, we look for systems that allow us more and more options. Because we want to be able to get it right, and we want to be able to look at the whole population as it becomes more and more diverse. Because it's, like you guys were saying, it's not what it was back in the 70s.
More and more complex. We do have to look at three-dimensional modeling now, because if you look at, say, the condo building right across from the bus station, a condo on the second floor facing the bus station, it can be a third of the sale price of one facing the Flatirons on the other side of the building 2 floors up. So within one building is a complex appraisal model that you have to make sure you've got the right view components within a building, and what floor they're on, and all those types of things. Those things didn't exist 20 years ago in terms of, we're looking at what do we do to model transit villages or urban villages in the proper way, and deal with these penthouse condos. All that variation, it's a much more complex problem. Fortunately, we've got more complex computers, but
so what is the date range right now for the cutoff? So the cutoff is June
30th.
Second to the last question. Dave's got one after that, and then we've got a wrap.
Okay, but so it's a 5-year
well,
horizon?
no, we revalue every 2 years. We're valuing currently, the notices we sent out is June 30th of 2010. So it was a year and a half ago, or about a full year now. About a full year ago is the date that is our appraisal date. 2 years ago it was June 30th of 2008. So every 2 years, the next one we'll do is June 30th of 2012. But this will stay for 2 years.
Okay, but in terms of the valuations that our properties will be, our taxes will reflect upon, is a 2-year time horizon.
That's right.
From 2010 back.
And we can go up to 5 years. So
For
like
comps.
in the unincorporated areas, you typically go back the full 5. If you're looking at homogeneous subdivisions in Longmont, you're only going to go to the 2.
You
So-
probably
So
weigh
you'd
the
be
most
going from
recent one.
2008 to 2010?
Yeah.
Okay.
The law actually says 18 months, but you can go back 5. Since we go to 2 year cycles, we usually work with 24
So
months.
on average,
you know.
I should look at my 2-year time horizon.
And we have we even have the time trended sales on our website, so you can look at our time
So you
trends.
can figure
and
out
all
as
that.
a homeowner if it's worth battling.
Right, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Another thing, because I know that some of you are investors, for commercial and industrial property, we can consider cost and income. For apartments, for all of them, it's always market also. But for commercial industrial, we can also consider cost and income. On apartments, we can also consider GRM.
All right, so
But we can't consider cost.
Dave, why don't you ask your last question, and I'll stop the video, and people can hang out and talk, but I just wanted to give people an option to take off.
As an architect,
So-
I'd just like to know the answer to give back to my clients who have this, I don't know if it's an urban myth or not, but once you start a rehab project, plans are submitted, and I know one plan goes to you, but then they progress, and some of them say, I don't want to put this last switch plate on, because then the assessor will take this into account, and and so they think that you don't take into account the value of that improvement until there's a final inspection.
90%.
Yeah.
Yeah, once it hits 90%. So they
That's
can
the
go ahead and
magic
leave
part.
that crown molding off for as long as they want to. They're still able to utilize it. They're still
Mhm.
able, the
Right.
space is still functional.
Right.
So
Mhm.
then it would still go ahead.
Once
and
they get
count.
that final, it's
Yeah.
But
you
some
know,
of them never get a final.
Right, right.
And so
Yeah,
then
that's true.
we will call or we'll send out
Mhm.
letters. We'll try to
So you do
obtain the
follow up, yeah.
information.
yeah. And we look every year at January, because basically assessment date's January 1st. That complicates a little more. A lot of people seem to think, well, on June 30th of 2010, my house was only half complete, so my taxes should be based on half, 50% of the value. No, it's really how the property stood as of January 1st of each year. So we look at January 1st, what's the state of development? So we're doing percent completes right around the first of the year, going around. So it's how it looks as of January 1st of every year, based on that prior market.
So if they finish the switch plate on January 2nd, they'd be good.
Yeah, that's the trick to it. And you don't want to tear down, don't want to tear or scrape a house down on December 20th, because we come back on January 1st. You could end up with a vacant land assessment, which is a big difference. And we've had people, our appraisers try now. We educate them to give people the benefit of the doubt, but there's been times when something's been classified as vacant, which was in transition, and but by state law, that's what it's supposed to be. So you tear it down on January 2nd.
And for those who
The
are
other way
developing-
around, though, you
thought
want
they
it to
wanted
be
to be vacant
vacant.
land.
Huh?
You want it as big. You want to tear it down before January 1st, so that way it's vacant land for that period, right?
No. Assessment
If
rate's
it's
different.
vacant, vacant land is assessed at 29%,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
residential's at
Okay, now I get it.
796. And I could do an hour talk on the Gallagher Amendment. I'm actually a proponent for it for a lot of reasons, because I have a historical background, but I understand what it's done to commercial industrial owners. It's shifted a lot of burden over to them, but there's a big history about how that all happened. But it's prevented tax revolts in this state, like happened in California, by keeping the residential burden down. Unfortunately, on the backs of the small business owners, the industrial, the big guys got big tax breaks when this all happened, when they got rid of inventory taxes, and that was the trade-off. That's what happened with Gallagher. That's what happened 20-some years ago.
All right, so I'm gonna ask the last
Okay.
question, and then
All right.
we're gonna wrap. And this is I've heard this story in Texas, that if you have a bunch of goats on your vacant lot, it's no longer a vacant lot; it's agricultural land, and you pay almost nothing in taxes because you've got a certain minimum number of goats. Is that true in Boulder County?
Yeah, the way the law reads, and remember, this is a farm and ranch state, is that you don't even have to prove an income, but you have to prove an intent of income from the land for the last
2 years.
2 years.
2 full years.
2 full years. So
And
if you show
full years is January 1st to January 1st. So
Right.
if you start mid-year, the clock doesn't start ticking until January 1st.
So if you have bees, and you show that you're trying to attempt to make beehives, and you're selling that honey, 2 years you can get agricultural assessment.
My favorite one, this is my hands down favorite one, because our ag appraiser came back and said, I cannot believe I'm going to give these people ag. Is I can't remember what type of weed, but these people have acres of this specific type of weed, and they sell it in their Chinese herb shop. So she was like, it's a weed. But they were able to show the receipts and everything, the packaging, the whole deal.
What
So
is-
even
what is
though it's
the-
all weeds.
What's the ag percentage?
The ag is based on productivity of the land. Just so in Boulder County, that can make the difference between $100,000 an acre, or just as an example, to something that could be $600 an acre or $1,000 an acre.
Oh my God.
Depending on whether it's dry, whether it's grazing land, grazing, irrigated.
So how does the medical marijuana thing?
Well,
Thank you, Jerry and Danielle, for presenting. We really appreciate it. Anybody that needs to take off can take off. We can go to medical marijuana.